Amazing. We are rolling. Bert Sorin, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Hey, thanks, Tyler. Appreciate you having me, man.
You live in South Carolina, correct? That's where the company's at?
Yep, I do. Lexington, South Carolina is kind of right outside of Columbia, which is the capital city, dead center of the state.
Gotcha. Well, I'm a big fan of you, and not only you, but your equipment, man. You guys built out my high school in Michigan a couple of years ago, and it is by far the coolest gym I've ever stepped foot in my entire life. It's like not even close.
I appreciate that. That's awesome. No, that was a good setup. We've done some stuff in Michigan over the years, and it's a state I don't spend a lot of time in, but I should because it's there's certainly parts of it that are pretty awesome. I was up in the UP, well, probably 20 years ago. We did Iron Mountain High School, and just spending some time up there was super cool.
Yeah, yeah. Michigan's beautiful, especially this time of year. So I always try to get back in the fall.
Yeah.
My wife and I, we're out in Montana, so we try not to leave around this time, which I'm sure you understand exactly why.
Yeah.
Um, but Michigan definitely holds a place, man. That's home.
Yeah, would you say Montana is the best in September or October? Like, where would you say, like, I mean, to me, like the Midwest, like, you want to be in the Midwest in November. October's like a weird kind of flex time. I would assume out west is nice, but also you have, our South Carolina, like, I call it the rut, but, it's not much to it. So I just know I try to stay in this kind of area in October and then Midwest and then September is going to be out west. So
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, September, like those last 2, 3 weeks in September, are absolutely perfect out here if you're chasing elk,
right,
which I love to do. And then about the middle of November, at least on the eastern side of the state, the muleys start getting pretty ruddy. So that's
oh,
that's
do
real
they?
fun to chase them. Yeah, that second, third week in November, it's usually on.
Okay, so they're kind of coinciding somewhat with whitetails in the Midwest.
Correct. Yep, right
Yep.
around there. Yep, depending on your state. Yeah,
Sure.
they match up pretty equally.
Yeah, we hunted muleys in Arizona in the high desert, and it was like a early January rut.
Yes,
It was pretty
yes.
wild.
Yeah, my buddy
It
had
was,
a tag for that January season that they have there, I believe, and he said they were going pretty well.
yeah, yeah. It's a hard one though with a bow out there. That's a beast of a hunt.
It is. It
It's
is.
cold, it's windy, and it's real hard to get on them.
Ye-
We watched, I remember a buck one time, and we sat there up on a cliff, and that deer would make about a mile, mile and a half, and just like this giant triangle. It's just like by the time you get down to him, like where they're just cruising. It's hard to get ahead of them.
It is, man. And especially if you're not familiar with the country, you're trying to figure it out as you go. You know, you're
Yeah,
only allotted so many days to hunt. It gets pretty time. Your time gets crunched very quickly, especially when you're
yeah,
trying to figure out and find something that you'd be happy to shoot. But you got a great one this year, right? Was it Utah?
yeah, yeah. That was in Utah. Yeah, so I was finally cracked the mule deer curse, and I think that was my fifth mule deer hunt. I missed a couple with my bow. I've been super close countless times, within 50 so many times. And it's just, finally it shook out. And then, to get rewarded with a 14-yard shot. And I stood over him for 30 minutes or more before he stood up out of his bed. It was like, okay, this is cool. So,
I remember you were kind of giving a somewhat of a play-by-play when that was going on. I was following pretty closely. I don't particularly care for like updates, especially on the internet nowadays, because there's so many people that say that they're awesome, but they're really just not. But when kind of more experienced guys get out, I really enjoy listening to how they're going about it and their tactics. So that was really cool.
uh,
And the
I,
velvet on that deer, man, almost looks fake. It just looked in excellent condition via
It
those
was. It
pictures.
didn't have any rub spots or any tears or anything like that. I go back and forth between velvet. I come from South Carolina. We can hunt deer in velvet, so to me, the velvet really isn't that exciting for me. It was more just the time that I was there that it lent itself most towards velvet. I mean, I generally like deer with that kind of grayish brown, more gray coat, big neck, hard
Hmm.
horn. That's kind of like in my mind. But I mean, you don't turn down the opportunity as of getting out after mule deer or any deer if you can. If you were to say, hey, let's go to Alberta next year and go to those big fields and spot and stalk them and be like, well, yes, let's go do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, sign me up. Now, you said you broke the curse. Was that your first archery mule
That's
deer?
first mule deer period. So
Good.
it's been one of those things that's like, I wouldn't say I figured out whitetails by any habit, but I did okay with them. But gosh, mule deer are just one of those things. I've wanted to get one since I was a kid, and it's just like this comedy of errors. Everything could happen. Could
Well,
happen.
we have that in common because I just shot my first archery mule deer here last
Congrats.
weekend. Last weekend, so
Oh, awesome.
I know exactly how you feel getting that monkey off your back. Golly,
Mhm.
that was sweet.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird. There's this weird feeling like after you make it happen that you're like, oh, I kind of get it now. And that's even what the guys at Big Chino were talking about. And I wasn't hunting with them on this hunt, but the last time I was with them, they were like, Bert, you're getting so close to it. Like, yeah, as they call it, they say killers kill. Like the guys who once they figured out how to do it, like the probability of success goes way up. But you just have to learn some little things that are more, I would say, not even techniques but more like dialect of the hunt. And
Agreed.
when I was out in Utah, I was Austin Land was actually my guide, and so he's just fantastic. He grew up with them, and he was making moves that I would not have done. um, and that's just, I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I would, you read, and I was like, listen to Remy Warren's thing he did there. Talk to Remy and just getting the ideas of like, how do you go about doing this? And even what we did to kill that buck, what no one would suggest necessarily doing that. It's just, it's kind of like a great quarterback. They're in the pocket and they just know what needs to happen and they make that game time decision. And, we walked in on him. I mean, got in on that buck. He heard something. We were in on 30 yards. We could see his antlers. He was feeding. We were in on him. He heard something and kind of boogered off, but we could tell he didn't know where we were because the wind was good. And he circled around the canyon 1,000 yards away and then bedded down. So we marked him in the top. We had a golden top tree that we marked and then went around the canyon, came down over, but we weren't really sure where it was. So, sneaking around trying to catch, where his antlers are. And we got on him, and at that point he was probably 40 yards from us when we finally saw, and muleys are pretty sharp, when you're
Yes.
walking around and you're stepping in, tall grass. And my thought was, hey, we got eyes on him. Like, let's let him stand up and make a move, and hopefully he'll feed below us and stick him or whatever. And Austin just like kept pushing and pushing, and it's like we got to where I had a hole about this big at 20 yards. We were at 36, but 20 yards between us was a hole about this big, and I was like, wait for him to stand up, and I'll shoot it through that hole. And he's like, no, we can do better. And I'm thinking like, dude, we're in the red zone, man. Like we're having like, we're kind of, I wouldn't say conversations, but it was like no. And then so he starts sneaking up, and I look, and there's all these bushes between us and the deer, and I'm like, you're not getting into a place that we could shoot him from. Like, and then I'm not little, and so it's like, well, if I'm walking in too, now it's two people coming in, and so I kind of let him get up close, and he kept getting closer and closer and closer, and he got to what I considered less than 20, and then he was just like, he's like, come on. I'm like, there's no freaking way that I'm getting in there too, right? And but what he was saying was really good to understand is like the wind was kicking pretty hard, and he was kind of teaching me like every time this wind gust,
How you go?
make up make up a foot, and so you could kind of see like if the wind didn't go, although it was steady, you'd get busted, but those little gusts for 3 seconds, and you could just bolt bolt and go. And within 20 minutes, I'd close that space, and we got to where there's these two bushes between us and the deer, and there's no way to get there. And so I had to literally like that was the last bit of cover, and I was going to have to go between this like gauntlet of bushes and get in front of it between. So there's nothing between me and the deer. It turned out to be 14 yards, and so he was just like, "You get right here, you're going to kill him." And I'm like, "Oh, how's that going to happen?" And then so he literally like just pulled this little dry branch back, and I kind of got skinny and went between the branch, and it was like I got past it like Mission Impossible lasers. You get past and you're like, oh, there's nothing between us and air, and I could just see the back of his ears. Well, your ears are in line with your eyes, so if he turns, it's like you're busted. So
Yep.
he just was watching the other way, and I just sat there just like this on him, for 30 minutes and just watched him breathe, just kind of felt like in sync with him. And then my heart rate calmed down and dropped, and it was like you kind of get this. It's checkmate. Like it's just you do
Execute.
anything. Yeah. And so I just looked back at Austin. I did this because I was going to stick him right in the base of the skull. I was like, because I'm thinking, I was like, we're under 15. Like I can't like. He's like, no, don't do that. And I was just like, all right, because you go into kill mode. You're just like, I'm gonna make this happen, right? And he's like, no, just wait till he stands up. I'm like, okay. So you see him start shifting around, and finally his butt comes up, and then you get to full draw, and there's that, as you've probably experienced, there's that micro, it feels like minutes, but it's microseconds of the just like, oh, checkmate, this is a done deal. Bubble levels out, anchor point's good, and you're just deciding like it's a dead deal. You just going, what's the best shot?
Right.
So he's facing away, and I'm right in front of his hip, behind his rear rib, going to drive it forward. And then I was like, well, I'm going to let him turn. But I knew, if I thought about it for a second, I said, well, if he turns, he'll have to turn uphill into the tree he was just sitting under. He won't be likely to do that. So if he's going to turn the other way, he's going to bomb off that hill. He takes 2 steps, he's out. So it was just kind of one of those, what am I waiting on? It's a hard quartering shot. I'm at 14 yards. And then the next thing, I saw the arrow flying, and that was that. And he went 60 yards and tumbled. So it was neat. But kind of going back to like those moves, I wouldn't have been as aggressive. But to learn that and to go, okay, these things aren't magic. Yes, they're magic in some way, but they're still fallible. You can make aggressive moves, and if we had not made that aggressive move, we wouldn't have killed that deer. So it was kind of like, I think when you put these animals at this pedestal of like, you hear, oh, they could hear everything they could do, it kind of causes you to freeze at times. You're like, oh, I can't do anything. It's like, well, sometimes I've just made moves like on whitetails, people, oh, they could hear anything, do whatever. Well, I've seen deer. I've been like, one time I was watching down this long fire break, and there was these planted pines, and this buck crossed in the back of a 10-foot, 5-foot opening. He just went, whoop. It was 250 yards. I just saw him cross, and he had 40 yards, and then he was going to hit the back of a field, and then but it was a back of a field was maybe a 10-yard stretch, so I'm looking at him, and I see him cross, and then it was immediately shoot, and I'm thinking, but I don't have a shot from my stand. I was in a stand, and I remember sliding down the ladder, going forwards, and I ran to the field, and I took my boot off as I slid down. I threw my boot on the ground and used it as a rest, and I beat him to the field. I sprinted and beat the deer to the field. And when he came out, I dropped him in the field. And my buddy was with me. He's like, how'd it happen? I told him. He's like, what made you even think of doing that? I was like, I don't know. But it was kind of solved the problem. It doesn't make me cool or anything, but it was like, I was okay with doing something really, really aggressive to make something happen right then, because really that was my only opportunity. But I just don't have that yet with elk or mule deer. And now that that's starting to develop, that's where I'm thinking like, okay, there will hopefully be a higher probability as I move forward, because I'm understanding what is doable, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, and I appreciate the transparency with that whole story, with your guide kind of making some moves that you didn't necessarily agree with at the time.
Yeah.
But that says a lot about you putting yourself in a position to be so like almost mentored in that spot, and putting your pride aside because somebody knows a little bit more about something that you're trying to get better at.
Oh man,
That's
that's what you
that's
pay
the
for.
key. That's the key to life. Exactly. You paid your hard-earned money for it too.
Yeah.
So it'd be boo-hoo of you to be like, no, 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 we're not doing it that way, and then you go in and blow the stalk. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. I mean that's why I like, getting guided hunts, because, yes, I'd like to get the animal, but I get to be with someone who, I talked to Austin. I said, I wanted to say they'd killed, a couple hundred elk a year, and, 30, 40, whatever muleys a year for his whole life. I go, that guy I could learn from. And so that's what I love. I mean, I ask a million questions in camp and everything. This is what these people do for a living. So, in my opinion, it's worth the price to go and to learn. If you learn, if you show up just to kill, then that's a missed opportunity. I remember like hunting, or I'm sorry, catfishing years ago down Santee Cooper lakes. They're like world-renowned fishing lakes. And me and my buddies, we loaded up all of our boats, got all our rods, blah blah, like all the stuff. We went down there and we got skunked for 3 days. It just got caught jack nothing. And then the last day we're like, screw this, and we got a guide, and we killed him. And the guide laughed. He goes, "You should have just done this the first day. Then you'd have known how to do it for the other 3 days." And I go, and I just always remembered that. I was like, get a guide first, learn how to do it, and then take it on your own versus a DIY. DIY is cool and all, but like my time is so valuable. And so if I'm burning my time or multiple years of time or multiple opportunities of time, once I feel like I could handle it on my own, like, but it's like getting a personal trainer or a coach or a business mentor or anything. You're like, what are you gonna open a business and then go out of business and then hire a mentor? Like that doesn't make any sense. So, I get a guy like Austin or guys like at BCO or wherever we've been, it's just like, listen to those dudes. That's what they do for a living, man. Like that's just that. And so, yes, going back to, I would not have made those moves. Austin totally made the calls on that. And it was actually neat because one of the guys that works there, he was on a ridge glassing and watching it. And he came down, he's a bit older fella. And it was one of the coolest experiences because he walked in, and I guess he had basically raised Austin. He'd been there at camp for 30 years. And he looked at Austin, he goes, "I'm going to tell you, I see hundreds and hundreds of stalks a year." He goes, "That was top 3 stalk I've ever seen, if I've ever witnessed in my life." And he had chills on his arm. He goes, "Look, I have chills watching that." And he goes, "That was as good as it gets." And I was like, "Yeah, that's pretty neat that I got to be a part of one of the best stalk he'd ever seen." And so like that was but again, it wasn't me. I did some things right, but I listened. Like that's the key. Just listen to the people who know what they're doing. So
Yeah, and if you don't, that's shame on you. You got to go in. You got to go into these hunts for the right reasons, and obviously, you did. And I try to do the same thing, man. I can't really afford guided hunts or anything like that, but I
Sure.
definitely make sure that when I do go out with a friend, that particular friend is definitely a way more experienced hunter than I am.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
how I get better. And I mean, if you're not trying to cut this learning curve in half out here, I think you're crazy because it is just so difficult. And yeah, I grew up hunting just like you in the Midwest, but when you come
Right.
out here, I mean, you feel like an absolute rookie. You are so
Oh,
green, and the learning curve is so long, and it's time, dude. It's time
you'll
because
run out of time.
you
Yeah.
run out of time.
You run out of time. And that's what we looked at. Like for when I was in sport, I interviewed a lady who was, she was Olympic gold medalist 1964. And we were talking, and when I was training, attempting to make an Olympic team, but we were kind of sharing notes, and she had said, when she mentored people, she's like, listen, here's your path. Here's where you are. Here's where the Olympics are. If everything goes right, you have a shot at this. This is just a very minute shot. And then she talked about all the other things, and she's like, this is the path. She's like, but if you party too much, that's a detour. If you don't get enough sleep, that's a detour. And she said, what will generally happen, just mathematically, you'll run out of time. You won't, in your shelf life of life, you won't be good long enough that it'll take you to get there if you do all the detours. And so that's kind of how I look at anything I want to be good at. Figure out the fastest way and the most direct path and reduce all the variables as much as possible, because I want to be a good mule deer hunter. I mean, I'm 47 right now. I don't want to be good at it finally when I'm 60. I want to go through my 40s and 50s and 60s and go get to enjoy this or anything that I'm into. And so that's where it's like, learn to reduce to possession and reduce those variables as much as possible. The slow cooking way, you have to be willing to go a long time. You have to be willing to go and be resilient and not kill for years, like all that stuff. Like that's just mental toughness and willingness of resilience. But you don't intentionally create that situation, right? It's like there's a difference between a competition mindset and a training mindset. Training is making things as hard as possible, so in competition you're more you're more valuable in that situation to get it done. Competition, however, is make things as easy as possible to win. Right? People really get those two things confused, and that's you're trying to overtrain to the point where you have a giant arsenal going in. But competition day, it's about winning. It's about reduced possession, get it done. And I've seen people, on comp day, they make it way harder than they need to, and they use too much energy. So that's a difference of even training to train or training to win. Two different things, two different mindsets. Training and competition are two different things.
They are. And I want to get into some more performance-based stuff as we carry out throughout this conversation. But I think it says a lot about a person going back to being able to accept and put themselves in a position of being mentored. Is that something that you learned growing up with your dad? Obviously, I know a little bit about the background of the company, and obviously he probably taught you a heck of a lot in terms of, running the business and operations and stuff. Did you learn that early on, in being like, hey, it's okay to not know everything and be mentored here if we're going to do this correctly?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's weird. You gotta follow your own path and ways to put your spin on whatever that is you're doing, because you have to be authentic to yourself, and you can't pretend to be anyone else. It won't stand up to the rigors of life. But going back to, if there's anything that I'm into, I'm trying to find the best people, honor them by, if they're honoring me with their time and their interest and in their education, I'm honoring them with my attention and my I'll buy dinner that night, I'll buy drinks that night if they want it, I'll put whatever I could put towards the relationship, and then I'll lean in, I'll give them eye contact, I'll ask good questions. I won't ask the same question multiple times, and I think as a mentee, that's about all you can do. But you have to make it valuable for the mentor to invest in you, and that's where yes, there's a donation of time from a mentor, but if you want that relationship to continue, there's a give and a take, and that's where I found, how do I make sure my mentors they're coming out of the deal in a better situation because of mentoring me. And that, I think, is something a lot of people miss. And I don't think it's they take because they're bad people, but they're trying to learn and trying to get whatever. But then they forget the other side of it. Okay, why does that person want to keep investing in you? Because at the human level, they still want they're still taking a portion of their life to give you. Really, if they're mentoring you in their time, that is seconds of their life they don't get back. So how am I making this a valuable thing for that person to do? And I think when you see it that way and you value people's time, and they had to go about it for 20 years to get really good, but they're going to help me get that good in 7. Well, that's worth something, and I'm okay with paying for that in some regard, whether that's actual money, actual time. But everyone has a finger on the equation, right? I mean, we say at Summer Strong, if you're here, you have a job. If you're a speaker, your job is to put it out there and entertain and everything to the crowd. If you're in the crowd, your job is to be respectful for the person on the stage. No one gets off for free here. There's no free lunch. You're all engaged in this thing. And I think when you start looking at life that way, things go pretty well. But you have to be open to doing that.
I agree. And the way I look at that as the mentee is, I'm a reflection of that mentor. If I'm not giving them everything back in return, I don't want to make them look bad. They're giving us their time. Exactly what you said.
Yeah, yeah. So I love finding extraordinary people, and the ones that just are a master of their craft, and then pumping them up as much as possible, because the great ones, they deserve it, whether they ask for it or not. They deserve it. I mean, there's whether it's your Cameron Hayneses of just being super tough, or your John Dudleys of being great shooters, and everyone has these little skill sets, and some are more extraordinary than others. But I'm always very quick to point where someone has an excellence, for sure, and I want to learn it.
too. I know you've been around a ton of athletes growing up, and obviously with the business that you run. Is there anything right now that you feel like younger athletes are lacking when it comes to strength and conditioning? Maybe they're overlooking a really important piece of training that
Hmm.
they could implement into their everyday lifestyle that you just think they're overlooking? Any type of
Um,
mobility or grip strength or anything like that?
uh, I don't know. I mean, strangely enough, I think athletes are very well trained these days.
I agree.
There's so much education, and there's been a industry. There's always been an industry on educating, but there's so much education and there's so much fight for white space that people want to bring. I mean, you could look through Instagram and there's a million things about every positioning of the squat, every position of the any kind of mobility or recovery. Like most things have been turned over at this point. Um, I think a lot of those aspects need to be touched, but I also think that there's some grit and some just willingness to work really freaking hard and kind of turn off some of those other pieces of the puzzle that I think maybe today's youth and that could maybe just me being an old man, right? Just saying the kids of today aren't as tough as like and that's quite probable as well. I think kids now are doing it more efficiently than we did. I think overtraining was a lot more prevalent, and again, that could be the other side of my statement. I don't see kids as working as hard or doing some of the weights or things like that. Yeah, but that being said, we were always banged up. And like everyone my age is all jacked up now. So, I think the education side of what people are doing, I mean, they've never had more things at their disposal. Um, you know, I'm shocked on some fronts how strong people are now. Like, you know, back when I was growing up, if you could power clean 300 pounds, like
Stud.
people that's a lot of weight, and now it's like every CrossFit gym has some rando dude that's like an orthodontist that could clean 300 pounds. It's, nothing against orthodontists, but they're not like, oh, this guy's a thrower or whatever, a lifter. It's just like he's a guy, like he sells insurance and he could snatch 100 kilos. You're like, shit, man.
Yeah.
That was hard, and so that's where I think the coolness, because you have such a giant population of people that are now cognizant of, vibration training, cold training, squats. Like, a friend of mine who was pretty well known in the strength industry, he and I met because in 1999 he showed up to my gym and he was just like, I came to this gym. I just moved here from Florida. He goes, I came to this gym because I heard you guys had bumper plates and a platform, and you're the only place in Columbia, South Carolina, which is our capital city, that has bumpers and a platform. So that was only 24 years ago in a population of over 100,000 people, multiple gyms. There was one place with bumper plates and a platform. And you look now, it's like, there's 15 CrossFits in that same area that have a gazillions of everything, plus your human performance places, plus your gyms, plus your. So you look at it and you're like, so going back to that meant nowhere else was doing power cleans generally, and that was only 24, 25 years ago. And so that's where I see just the education explosion of other types of lifts. I mean, Squattober is a perfect example. There's hundreds of thousands of people that squat on Squattober. So you look at it and you're like, wow, you wouldn't have seen that 20 years ago. Susie soccer moms wouldn't know percentages and of their rep max and perceived force, exertion. Those aren't things they would have known, or thought that squatting was a good idea for a 43-year-old mother of three. But now those same girls are squatting 250. And it's just like, holy cow, like the game has changed. So I don't know, man. That's a hard question because like kind of all the cards are on the table right now. And a lot of people are doing really, really well with them. So,
There is so much information out there. You're absolutely right with that. And you said you were 47. You need to give yourself a little bit more credit, brother. You don't look anywhere near close to that. And that leads me in to my next question
thanks.
is that I'm a performance coach for men, and a lot of the guys are just trying to get back on track. They want to get in better shape and, kind of try to turn this back into somewhat of a lifestyle.
Sure.
obviously going back to your age, you've clearly been living this lifestyle for a long time because how you look shows that. What has been something that's really worked for you in terms of staying on the path? How do you get up every day and do what you're supposed to do? It's the question that people want to know more than anything in this fitness life, is that how do you stay consistent? How do you just do things that you don't want to do? What have you done that has worked for you over the decades that you've been in the gym?
That's a good question. It's probably not as sexy of an answer as you'd like to hear. Um,
It's not a sexy podcast, brother. We're good.
you got to love it, right? You have to love the strenuous life. You have to love the struggle. You have to love, not only love it and love the acute time of it, you have to love and appreciate and come to, I would be, expect the results. I learned in the early 90s that squatting heavy, or squatting hard, should I say, more than anything, and eating a lot of meat and resting, I saw it. I saw myself in the 94. I saw myself put on 30 pounds of generally muscle. My body fat went from 5 to 7%. Okay, great. So it was a little bit of fat. But I put on 30 pounds between August and December of my freshman year in college. So what did I do? I ate everything in sight, and I squatted and lifted until I puked, literally, or passed out or whatever. But you kind of learn, you're like, oh, that's the hack. So if I train really, really hard and I do some of these other things right, my whole everything changes and it gets ridiculously better and everything. Now, of course, the takeoff has flattened, right? Like, I'm not doing those type of gains. But you kind of just come to the realization is like, if I put in, I mean, right now I don't have to, I hate to say it, I don't have to put in that much effort. People, some of the guys that train, they're like, holy crap, you don't train very often. I go, my base is so large. Like, I've squatted, my first 500-pound squat was 28 years ago. Like, it's been a long time. So my body's been under that stress for a lot. It likes about 3, maybe 4 days a week for about 30 to 40 minutes. Anything more than that, I'll get overuse. Anything under that, I will be under optimized.
Yes.
But I paid my dues to get to that point, right? And I like staying in that. I'm kind of, I wouldn't say I'm battle ready per se. I'm not like in the high, but I'm 8 weeks away from what I call touching the curtain at any time. Like, I could go up and get kind of in that rarefied air. At my age, I know I can't stay there because, again, injuries and overuse will start creeping in. But if I want to run it up and do a heavy pull or a heavy squat, I'm 6 to 8 weeks away from it at all times. All I got to do is focus some things, shed off some other things. I could ride that ride, and then I make sure I touch the curtain. I come right back down into normal-ish, normalcy. But that just, I love it because I know it works and I know it's part of my life. And then it just gets so ingrained in who you are. I haven't gone more than 3 days without training. I don't know, since the 90s. It's just what you do. I wake up, I have creatine and branched chain amino acids. After that, I eat 6 eggs or meat and coffee. And that's what I do. And then at noon, I eat lunch, typical, today we went Mexican, have fajitas, that kind of crap, without the tortillas. Mm-hmm. I get fajitas for 2, so I'm going to have my second lunch at 3:30, whatever I didn't eat. And I'm going to lift around 5, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to play with the kids and do whatever, and I'm going to eat again, and I'm going to get as much sleep as I can, and it's not that hard to figure out. Like, it just really isn't. But when you get like, this is what life looks like. This is what it just looks like. It's
just what it is.
Just what it is. And if I want to clear my mind before I train, and sometimes I'll clear my mind, I'll come home, work's still in my brain, I'll go, hey, hon, I'm going to go up in the cave. I'll shoot my bow for 10 or 15 minutes and stay in touch with it. During the season, I've learned I don't shoot a lot, because I felt that I think there's some bad habits that could be developed. And my bow should be shooting really, really, really good going into the season. And I know the more reps I put on it during the season, the higher probability it is for something to go awry before I go hunt. So my workout that day could be 3 shots. And I'll just go, let me pick up my bow. I'll sometimes just, like I call it raw dog, I'll just look and go, 50 yards. And I'll just turn it to 50. I'll take 1 shot. And if I drill it, I'm done. Because I've shown that my technique was on, my estimated range is on, my confidence level is there. I don't need to beat a dead horse. I've taken hundreds of thousands of shots. So it's kind of like with weightlifting too. I'll go in, I'll do some stuff, I'll keep in touch with it. My body could recover from it. I'm not gambling. It's kind of like, it's like you go to the table and you win. Don't keep gambling. Like, take the money and run, right? And so that's where I think it doesn't sound sexy. I'm sure people want to hear me, oh, I train until I bleed and this and that and the other. Yeah, I did in the 90s and 2000s and early in 10, 12 when I was professional Highland Games. I did all that. But I've realized I can't do that anymore. So just keeping it sharpened every little bit. Like, don't let the knife get dull. Just strop it a little bit every day. Keep it super sharp, and you'll never have to pull the file back out. And that's basically what it boils down to. So many people let the knife get dull that they have to bring the file out and reshape the whole blade. If you got to do that, bring the file out and reshape the blade, but do it as fast as possible and get where that thing starts getting sharp again. And then don't let it get dull anymore. Like, I never have to get in shape because
You always stay in pretty much good shape.
Because I'm always kind of in there. You know, I've varied 4 pounds body weight in the last 5 years. It's just kind of what, if I feel like I'm getting a little soft, I'll back off carbs. If I feel like I need to get a little stronger, I'll bump my protein and I'll put one more set of my squats on. And I know in the next 5 weeks that will make a difference. But I know my body very, very well, but I've had a million reps with it. And there's no fast track to that. You just got to live it.
Bert, I'm smiling because I know you don't listen to the show, and it's okay. Maybe you will start, but I literally preach this shit. I might have said it. I might have said it last week, almost verbatim. Like, you'd never really have to get in shape because Tyler personally stays in relatively good shape.
Yeah.
Just like Bert, he's 6 to 8 weeks from touching that curtain. Same thing with me. I'll run a marathon tomorrow morning if you want to.
Yeah, and now it would kill me to do that, but
But that's my thing. That's my thing.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right, exactly. You're always
Yeah.
in that hub. Now, could you get better? Sure. Give me 6 weeks of training, and I'll get within 95% of my best. I could be with that, but I'm going to walk at 80% of my best, kind of daily. That's my everyday carry. You know, I kind of we talk about like the EDC. My EDC is I got a 400-pound squat in my pocket any day I want it. And if it drops, and I'll play. You know, if I'm in the threes, I'm like, ooh, this is kind of heavy. I go, well, we need to bump up the EDC a little bit. Like, it's just a little bit less than I'd like it to be right now. I'm not going after anything, and then that's where the rate of perceived, exertion is. I know how heavy 225 should feel. If it's feeling a little too heavy, then I need to back off of this, bump up this, or if I go on a walk with my wife and I put on a 50-pound pack and I'm a little winded coming back up our driveway hill, okay, then I'm going to do one more ruck a week. I'm not going to go crazy, but in 3 weeks, I'll be back to where I want to be. That's fine. But you just got to be kind of checking it in all the time. That's how I believe to do it, because otherwise it's a really high probability of getting overtrained. It's people are like, oh, I need to lose weight, and they'll do these drastic measures. They're not sustainable. So you gotta be okay with the long haul, and that's with everything. Resilience is the key to learning hunting, learning business, staying in shape, relationships, all of it boils down to resilience. I mean, it takes so long to get good at something. Most people never get there, not because they didn't have the talent, they just didn't put in the time. I mean, it's just what it is. If it takes you 10 years to build a great business and you quit at 7, I guarantee you how good your business is going to be. It's going to be a 0 because you quit. You're not going to be where you want to be. And the thing is, those of us who we're dreamers, we look ahead, we want things so badly, you'll never be where you want to be. Ever.
There's no end.
There's no end. And that's what you kind of just realize. You go, okay, today is good enough to enjoy it. It's not where I want to be. So I'm not stuck in you kind of stuck in like a little bit of a purgatory because there's never like, this is the greatest thing or this is the worst. No, it's not that bad. It's not as good as I'd want it to be, but I got tomorrow. I got another shot. So you just keep doing that. And then one day you look back and you're like, oh man, 3 years ago, it was significantly different. But most people lose interest after a year or two. And that's why most people aren't very good at stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's what separates a lot of people from being successful, especially in business, is that there is no end. There is no, oh, hey, we had $1 million in sales. We made it. Okay, well, you have a whole nother calendar year coming up. Now what are you going to do? If you go out and make 100
Right.
grand, you kind of
Right.
fucked up.
Or your $1 million of sales, there's a percentage of that goes to your overhead. So
And you
you
lost money.
grew. Yeah, and then you got to pay taxes and like this. I mean, like jokingly, but like the reality of it is never as someone put it. They said you're never as good as your highlight reel, and you're never as bad as your worst day. Like it's always something, you know. It's just like, oh, great, you did $1 million more in sales. Okay, well, that was probably really a couple $100,000 that was different, and you probably had to hire more people. And you had, so is it positive? Yes. Does it make who you are and your identity and all these other things? Oh boy, it better not. It better not. I mean, and you could put that to anything. You know, kill a 200-inch whitetail. That's what, if I do that, then I'll be the man. Probably not.
Probably not.
Other people have done it. Hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully it'd be awesome. You know, and hopefully it makes your day amazing for a few days. But the reality is, you know, it's a big world. You know, after a while, no one cares. Just move on.
As an athlete, or maybe somebody who's striving to build upon a lifestyle and get back into the groove of things and try to get their life
Sure.
back on track physically, what is a couple pieces of equipment that you just were like, hey, you need this, this, and that, and if you utilize these handful of things, you'll get back on track? Because a lot of people, I mean, you see there's just so much shit out there, you
There's
know,
some.
I mean, especially the, 30-day abs and all this other shit, and I have a feeling you're gonna answer this in an old school approach, which I really appreciate because I'm the same way. But just give me a list of maybe 3 to 5 pieces of equipment where you're like, hey, if you commit to these things, you're gonna be right where you need to be.
Yeah, I would say your bottom tier, the thing that you would have the most versatility is a barbell and plates. I mean, a heavy, relatively heavy axial loaded, axial being the main stem of the body, a heavy duty axial loaded compound movement, compound meaning multiple joints of the body are moving at the same time. It solves a lot of stuff, i.e., a deadlift, overhead press, a squat. But the nice part is even without a rack, you could do a deadlift, overhead press, bent over rows. So now you have a leg exercise, a push exercise, and a pull exercise. A barbell and a couple 100 pounds of plates will solve a lot. Now you can take it one step up. An upward extension of that is you add a rack. Why do you add a rack? It holds the barbell off the ground for predetermined position, so you can get under the bar easier and safer, i.e. a squat, a bench press, things like that. So you could grow it from there. Arguably, that's the most famous, popular thing we sell are really awesome racks and the barbells and everything like that. But if I was to say, man, put it this way, my wife, she likes training, doesn't love training, and she's a mom of 3 kids that's homeschooling and working as a counselor, so she doesn't have a lot of time. She started this week. She's like, I got to get back in shape. And I go, okay, what are you going to do? And she's like, well, you know what I'm going to do. She walks in, she puts 100 pounds on a deadlift trap bar, and she does 100 reps.
Boom.
And as many sets as it takes her to get to 100 reps, it usually takes about 8 to 10 minutes of work. If she goes fast, it becomes cardio. If it's not, it's strength work. And then when she could bang that out in relatively little sets, instead of 25s on there, she'll put 45s on there, so it bumps up to 150. And she'll just do the same thing, and we laugh. She's like, if more women would just do this, you get into better shape, you burning a ton of fat. I mean, you're using a ton of muscle. I mean, and then on this week, all we added in was some rowing options for upper back, because women generally have more of a rounded posture, or they don't have a lot of upper back musculature. That's her whole workout right now. Is she's like, yeah, I'm just going to do this every day to kind of just get back into it, and then every day it takes her a little bit less time to do it, and then probably in a week or so we'll go to 150. We'll just do it again. It's like, now that won't work forever, but if more people would do something that simple, if they did 100 reps of dumbbell of a deadlift, starting at 100 pounds, and then some pull-ups at the end, you'll be fine. Like, that's going to push you in the right way. Dan John, Dan John, the strength trainer, he said one time, he said, find a woman who can squat or deadlift. So let's say deadlift 225 and could do 5 pull-ups, and she will be rock star hot, no question. And I go, why is that? He goes, because if she could pull 225, she has muscle, and if she could do 5 pull-ups, she's not fat. And you're like, wow, it was simple as that. He's like, that's the combo. And you're like, really? And he's like, yeah, because they're going to carry muscle and they're going to be lean. And he goes, if they could do those 2 things, because you train a woman, if she wants to look better, be toned, he goes, you train a woman to be able to do those 2 things, and I guarantee you she'll be happy with how she looks. And I was just like, it's so stupid simple. But you could probably shift it to a male and say 405 deadlift, 10 pull-ups. It's probably about the same.
Agreed.
You're going to carry muscle. You're going to carry muscle up top, and you won't be fat, because you can't do 10 pull-ups if you're fat, generally. And so
on a t-shirt.
You just kind of basic, you look at a buddy of mine, actually, Bill Gillespie, he works for me. He was an NFL strength coach and college strength coach forever. He goes, you know what the highest correlation was to the fastest guys on our team when he was with the Seahawks? I said, what? He goes, who could do the most pull-ups? I said, what? I said, oh, is that because of their turnover and their back and all this stuff? He goes, nope. If they can do a lot of pull-ups, it means they're strong and they're not fat, and those guys are fast. And I was just like, really? Not causation, but certainly correlation. He's like, you find a dude that can do 30 pull-ups? He's like, they got a big wide back, and he goes, and they're probably about 7% body fat, and they're cook on the field. And you're like, oh, huh.
We laugh, but when you actually start putting the pieces together, you're like, this is the most true thing ever.
You can't shoot holes in it.
Right, you can't.
You can't, because you take either variable, you go, okay, well, what if he could do 10 pull-ups, but I only can pull 225? He's not going to be that muscular. He's not that strong. But what if he could pull 500 and can't do then he's probably a big fat guy. This strong. Like, it's dumb simple. So that's what I would say would be my first step, because that way, if you have a barbell and you have a rack, you could do pull-ups, or you could do squats, you could do deadlifts. I wouldn't say you're done, but man, you did most of the stuff. And if you can't afford any of that space-wise or money-wise, get 2 kettlebells, 1 medium heavy and 1 heavy, and learn all the different exercises that you could do with those. And when they're not heavy anymore, do them either faster or do them for longer periods of time. And then, now, you will have a capped ability level that you'll be able to go. But you get a kettlebell that's 80 pounds and you could do a lot of stuff with it for a few, 3 or 4 minutes. You're not in bad shape. Like, you're probably strong. You're probably pretty lean. So those are my answers to that.
That's perfect. I want to be respectful of your time. I just got 1 or 2 more things.
And that's left. We got it.
Perfect. Did you all create Squat-tober?
Yeah.
Tell me the science behind it, because I think it's just amazing.
I was at a conference. I was the Modern Day Marine in Quantico, Virginia. This was 9 years ago. And I remember I was outside. Aaron Osmus called me because he was working for me. He was my West Coast guy. And we were talking about something. I was like, dude, it was September, mid-September. And I was like, man, we ought to do something that's like basically talks about how awesome the squat is. And we were just going back and forth. We're like, yeah, more people need to squat, blah, blah, blah. Like we should do a total month on Instagram that is just talking about the benefits of squatting and like, hey, let's put pictures of like the greatest squatters of all time and dudes with super jacked legs and like just we just like it would be fun to talk about. And I was like, it would be like squat timber or something like that. And I'm like, crap, it's already like September 15th. And I was like, we could do next month. How about like Squattober? And we're like, yeah, that'll work. I mean, it was literally that fast. So the first year, I don't know if you remember, but all we did was just pictures every day and talked about squatting tips, and just kind of just to shine a light on arguably the king of exercises. And then the next year, Aaron was like, "Hey man, I got an idea. Like, I'm gonna program like because people are asking me if you want your squat to go up, what's the best way to do it?" He's like, "I got a ton of programs." He's like, "But I'm gonna write one and have it where we squat every single day." And I kind of pushed back on that because I came from the world that you don't squat every day. And he's like, "Yeah, but you could adjust, especially if it's only for 30 days." He goes, "You could adjust the volume, the intensities, the frequency, everything like that. You can make it work." And I was like, "All right, man." I was like, he's a master strength coach, was multiple national champion teams and everything like that, and he's a big squatter. He was like, "I'm gonna write up something," and it was the first year, and people were like, "There ain't no way you're gonna squat every freaking day." But at the end of the thing, we've every the month, it was a lot of people had fun. No, number one is do something pretty hard for 30 days and commit to something, which most
Thanks.
people won't. Number two, you did something fun, and you did it as a community. People got together, started cheering each other on. You decided you were going to do a thing. You committed. You did it. You did something hard, like I said. But the average PR squat was like 50 pounds at the end of it, and so it kind of shifted how people saw things, because I came from the world of you squat 2 times a week, like a heavy day, a light day. That's what you do. Anything more than that, you're gonna bust into your gains and this and that and the other. Now, but if you change those variables, I think who was it? John name doesn't. He was a strength coach at University Pacific years ago. He had one of my friends squatting 5 days a week, but they would do a different variation of a squat every day, and the person never got overtrained. And so it was like, oh, maybe you can if it's in different, like I said, intensities, joint angles, things like that. And so when Aaron did it the first year, it was a huge success. And so every year he just tweaks the programming slightly. It follows some of the same basic tonnage outputs. He brings you right to the brink and then pulls you back down. And then everyone seems to, I'm say everyone, majority of people that do it and do it correctly seem to get PRs at the end of it, which I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought people would survive. I didn't think they would thrive. So I learned from that one. I go, man, 30 days, I figure people will be holding on with pipe cleaners and bubble gum at the end of the whole thing, much less hit their best squat they've ever had. And then we started seeing about 5 years ago, we started seeing everyone who did it, their bench press went up 2 to 3 weeks into November. And we think it was the hormonal response, but it was generally the additional muscle mass, just the more strength in general, because their bench wasn't getting torn up and beat up, but the CNS was fired up. They put on lean mass, the hormonal, like everything. And Aaron comes, he's like, "Dude, I just benched 500. And it's like, where did that come from? He's like, "I don't know. I've barely been benching this whole time." It's like, oh yeah, the shoulders are feeling good, they're rested, but you're still getting a stressor to the body. So we kind of started playing with that idea. So again, going back to like kind of the first story, Aaron was a mentor to me in that regard. And I think, to thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, like this is probable and possible to do. And if you do it right, it's kind of like the first time you cook, you're cooking something that takes 10 minutes to cook a steak, and then the first time you cook a steak or a piece of meat that's 14 hours, you're like, this is going to be terrible. And then it's like, awesome. Well, because your volume and your intensities had to be right for that duration. And when you get it right, it's pretty beautiful, because you see people walk away with these, I feel better, I'm leaner, I'm bigger, I'm this, I'm that, my legs are this, like all this whole thing that happens. So that's kind of like how Squattober came about, and we're in our 9th year right now. So
Yeah, really cool.
wow.
I actually know a couple guys personally whose bench went up after participating in Squattober. So that's very, very honest because I was surprised at it as well, and they swore by it. So that's really
Yeah.
cool that you brought that up because
And then we'll, you kind of give the body November. I wouldn't say off, but that's kind of we joke. We used to have a thing called Brovember. It was basically all just bro lifting arms and stuff during November because your legs and your back are just torched after
torched.
October. So you do a bunch of fun chest stuff, upper body stuff, and then December comes along. Well, now you still have the base that you built, and then you turn it into optimization for deadlifts, and then everyone pulls a big dead before the end of the year. So you end up getting kind of like a double wave with it.
Yeah, you do.
So if you look at like our world, I try to rebuild my strength towards the end of the year, beginning of the new year, and then I kind of pull my work capacity off of that and everything. And so that was always, it's nice because you come into the new year stronger than you've ever been.
Which is a very smart time to do it for people that are thinking about trying to put some weight on because normally in November and December it's a little bit colder. People are eating a little bit more with the family
Yep.
coming into town, so that's a great time to try to put on a little bit of weight.
Yeah. So you mean, as we've seen, I'm not telling everyone to eat like complete idiots, but you can. I'll get torched for saying this. I wouldn't say you can't outwork a poor diet, but you can make that line pretty squishy. Like as far
Mhm.
as like, I mean, I got really big and strong off of some crazy stuff. Because if you're doing the work, your body needs calories, and so yeah, that's a perfect time to have second and third helpings at Thanksgiving. Um, and you could get away with it when you're doing that amount of work.
As long as you're getting the work in first. That's right.
Right. But generally, there's a inverse relationship between those who overeat and those who overwork. Generally, don't occupy the same space. They're two different mindsets.
Agreed.
So, and then the rarefied air, the people who do occupy both, they're usually pretty big and strong.
Agreed.
That's kind of how it goes.
Last thing, Bert, I know we touched on perseverance with entrepreneurship and things of that nature. But as a younger entrepreneur, man, what really helped you, and any advice that you have for guys that are trying to build a business such as myself and guys that are just trying to make the right connections, the right relationships, do things the right way, be consistent, spread a good message, and just positive vibes.
Yeah, that's I appreciate that. I mean, one of our things is, like I said before, you just got to be super resilient, and it's almost you just can't listen to what everyone says. Kind of going back to that 10-year model. To be successful, you have to do things relatively right for 10 years or so, which means I always tell people, I said, so the people that are doing things that look weird right now, they're the people in 10 years that are going to be like on podcasts and people will be listening to or whatever. So the stuff, don't be so fast to judge like, oh, this guy's doing this weird thing. Like, give it 10 years. If he could hold the helm and keep going he or she keep going after it, like if they can survive that long, then there's probably some meat there on the bone. So the resilience, but then, you got to believe in it. But lastly, I would just say make sure that you have a mentor or someone that could kind of what we call like the light giver. That's back to one of my old mentors, Judd Logan, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But we considered him the light giver, and the light giver means they illuminate your path further than you can currently see. And so that would be someone, telling me, hey, I know Sorinex is a mom and pop, or officially it was a son and pop, you know, custom shop, but this thing can be big, and I'll give you some qualitative and quantitative ideas what I'm talking about. And I've had people early in those days, or wasn't even early in there, but after a while, we're like, hey, you realize what that could be, and unfortunately at times you're like, because you're in it, right? You're so in it, you're like, I don't know, like you're like in a bar fight where it's like if someone was trying to talk to you about, doing your taxes at that point, you're just in the fight, right? You don't have time to be, a deep thinker. And when someone sits there and goes, hey, like I see what's happening here, like where are you going to be in 10 years with this? And then when the answer is, I don't know, I just want to survive till tomorrow. that's something, but at some point you have to get out of that mindset to see what it could be. And at times I still have to challenge myself. I was having lunch with one of my managers today, and we were talking, where do we see the growth opportunity? Where do we see things happen? Where do we want to see Sorinex and Sorinex Outdoors, 5-10 years from now? And that's hard to think of because that sounds like a really long time, but to think of Squattober was almost 10 years ago, and it just felt like a minute, And so that's where I would say, you got to be resilient, but you got to either be your own light giver or find a light giver that could give you some good aspect and perspective of, like, this could be a thing. And then you have to find your first followers. Being a leader is great, but your first followers are the ones that start the whole thing. Otherwise you're just some crazy person on the top of a mountain, barking out what your life goal is, and until someone bites and goes, yeah, okay, that sounds good. I'll follow that. They're your most important people, because otherwise, you're just you're a lone wolf. So.
Fantastic, brother. Before I get you out of here, where can people find you?
Sure. They could find me on Insta. It's pretty easy. I update that relatively often. It's Bert Sorin, BertSorin. Sorinex Outdoors, also on IG, Sorinex Squattober, Sorinex December. But then Sorinex.com is like our website where a bunch of stuff. And we also have the Sorinex Outdoors website building right now, which is going to have some cool stuff going on.
Awesome. Yeah, y'all head over to Sorinex and go get some equipment. It's the best on the market, man. I swear by it. So
I appreciate
you're welcome, Bert. Listen, stay on the line, brother, and then I'll get you out of here.
Sounds good.
Thank you.